Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with an interesting topic, I think. Are people's attention spans getting shorter when it comes to listening to music? It's a valid question, I think, because one of the things that classical music people are so desperately afraid of is that the medium depends for its survival on the ability of people to set aside a large chunk of time to do nothing but listen, at least the music in large forms. And music in large forms, as I've pointed out before, is the exception rather than the rule. A lot of what we regard as the great masterpieces, symphonies, concertos, operas, oratorios, the Bach passions, which go on forever, they require a substantial investment of time. And not only an investment of time, but if the music is abstract, or that is, it doesn't have words, a feeling for the shape and architecture of pure sound as it can be constructed over a multi-section, large piece like a symphony. And doing that kind of listening is not normal. It really isn't. It's not even normal as a function of what music is traditionally. So I think we need to be clear about a couple of things. Because my view is that attention spans are not getting less. The way that music is distributed and sold, the reception of music, the way that it's packaged for consumption, that changes over time. It really does. It's a function of the media and what people's expectations are. But the reality is that for the vast majority of the human race, at least here in the West, since the beginning of notated music, most pieces were quite short. 2, 3, 4 minutes. I mean, that was basically what we had. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I just revived, the series Miniature Masterpieces, great music in 2 minutes or less. And we did I did the video on works for people with short attention spans. The basic unit of musical digestion is the song. And by definition, songs are generally brief, lyrical effusions in simple forms. Now, there are terribly long songs, crazy songs. There's song cycles made up of agglomerations of songs. But the basic song is a fairly short and simple thing. And that's how most people consume music. That's how most people regard music. The other option for songs that doesn't involve singing as much is the dance. And dances are usually rather short because, you've only got so much energy. You can only keep moving for a few minutes at a time. Then you need to sit down and take a breath or, fan yourself if you were back in the old days or, let the stench evaporate from the fact that you didn't have deodorant, dances too tend to be brief and simple. And that's how people consume music. Music that is bigger, art music, if you want to call it that. I hate that term, but, there it is not usual. And the people, such as ourselves, theoretically, who consume and enjoy and listen to art music, have trained ourselves to give it a certain amount of space in our lives, to take a certain amount of time at it. And doing that it takes practice, it takes experience, it takes a desire to want to go beyond the simple forms of songs and dances. A very, very reasonable thing, actually. And composers, of course, who are exploring the possibilities of writing music in larger forms, want audiences who are willing to undergo that journey with them and to spend hours at a time sitting in front of an opera or doing something. And of course, it's not surprising. It's not surprising that there's a certain elitist presupposition when it comes to, the classical music universe. And the reason is because traditionally the people who had time on their hands were the aristocracy. They were a large group of people. Not huge, but I mean, they were a minority of the population of their country, but they were enough of them to create an artistic establishment. They had lots of time on their hands because you have to remember, the aristocrats were essentially soldiers. Their job was to go to war. And when there wasn't a war, I mean, there were lots of wars, but when there wasn't a war, they basically just sat around doing nothing. I mean, they sat in their palaces and they got entertained. They owned everything. Everybody worked for them. Their income was derived from the ownership of land, and that gave them fabulous resources. So they were able to devise entertainments which would fill up their day, all of it, the whole day. And those entertainments were created by composers who were not aristocrats. They were normal people, for the most part, lower class folk such as ourselves. And they were told to write long. I mean, they really were. It's not that the aristocrats had longer attention spans than any of us. They had musical training because they were raised by, private tutors who they had to learn how to dance and how to play instruments and how to be witty and entertain each other. Whether they understood all of what they were hearing, who knows? Music was part of the social structure of their lives. So they went to the opera to be seen, and they had to be seen for several hours. Whether they actually listened to the opera, who knows? And it was the same thing with symphony concerts and Lenten oratorios or all of the other things that they did. They had quantities of time on their hands, and the music was designed to fill that time. But you could readily understand just what an unusual circumstance that was. The rest of the populace, such as it was busy. They were working. They weren't educated. They didn't have access to orchestras and to opera houses and to all of this stuff. They were employed by the aristocrats doing whatever they did, doing scut work, cleaning out urinals and, painting and sculpting and, whatever they had to do. That's what they did. And if they wanted to hear music, what did they hear? They heard songs and they heard dances for the most part. Gradually, as the middle classes began to aspire to doing what the aristocrats were doing, orchestras and performing arts ensembles and permanent ensembles arose to provide middle class people, merchants and retailers and other people like that, and religious people and whatnot, who also had finally disposable income and time on their hands. They were able to invest that time in music in larger forms. So I think in a way the question of whether attention spans are getting shorter is I think it's wrong. It's the wrong question. It's an elitist question, because attention spans, we don't know what anyone's particular attention span is. Half the people who go to symphony concerts probably have very short attention spans. Who knows why they even go? Maybe it's the music, maybe it's to be seen, maybe it's because someone tells them they have to. Who knows? And how much they get out of it, and if they stay awake through the whole thing, it's an individual decision. But more than that, the idea that there is a natural sort of long attention span, music in large form mentality, I think is incorrect. I really do. I believe that there are always people who are incredibly musical. I mean, they become great composers or the great performers. Jazz musicians who can improvise endlessly for hours. I mean, people who have incredible facility with manipulating musical materials. But that's a tiny, tiny, tiny minority. The rest of us hear things that we love and we follow our interests. I mean, there's no difference between listening to a symphony and reading a long novel, or watching a long sports event with the commercials, going to the Super Bowl. I mean, these things take up hours and hours of time, and we decide whether we want to invest those hours and hours of time because whatever that thing is interests us. So it's not a question of attention span at all. It's a question of your interest and devotion to the type of entertainment or diversion that you choose to fill up your day. I mean, you could spend the day crocheting. I mean, it's whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Music isn't special. It really isn't. I know that will horrify some of you. But in that sense, it is not. It's only a question of how much time we decide to invest. And if we decide to invest the time, the large works are there. They're waiting for us to indulge and enjoy. But it's not something that I think we should be thinking of as a inherent quality. There's nothing inherent about any of it. It's all about your personal preference and your personal choice. And that, my friends, is the answer to the question. The attention span is not getting shorter. There are all kinds of ways to enjoy bits of music. But you could also enjoy the longer stuff. And the people who want to do it will. And the people who aren't interested, they're only interested in bits, will enjoy their bits. And it's always been that way. If you look at it historically, you will realize that we are no different from our ancestors hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. The human beings, Homo sapiens, may be evolving slowly in certain respects. We're losing our little toes and our little pinky fingers, and, genetic drift is drifting. But that does not mean that our attention spans are different from what they were throughout history. I don't believe it for a minute. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.